Isle of Man has always had places people avoid after dark, not because of crime, not because of animals, because some places feel wrong. And among all the island's old legends, none carried more fear than the ruined remains of St. Trinian's church. A church with no roof, a church no one could keep standing. For centuries, locals whispered the same story. Every time the roof was rebuilt, something tore it down, something ancient, something called the Buggane. For most people, it was only folklore, a story for tourists. A monster used to entertain children during storms. But when restoration work began again in the autumn of 2026, the island started changing. Animals vanished from nearby farmland. Electrical failures spread across Greeba. People reported strange lights moving silently above the hills at night. And then the first worker disappeared. His name was Daniel Creer, 32 years old. Builder. No history of mental illness, no reason to vanish. His crew reported hearing screaming near the church scaffolding during a sudden thunderstorm. When police arrived, they found twisted metal, shattered floodlights, tools scattered across the graveyard, and in the mud beside the ruined church, gigantic hoofprints, too large to belong to any known animal. That was when the Foundation contacted Adam Mercer. Officially, the Foundation investigated high strangeness events. Unofficially, they investigated the things governments refused to acknowledge existed. Mercer arrived on the island 2 days later under heavy rain. The moment he stepped out of the vehicle near St. Trinian's, his scar started burning. The same scar carved into his arm years earlier during the Skinwalker Ranch incident. The same scar linked to the dogmen. That had never happened before. The church stood alone against the storm, roofless, broken, ancient. Scaffolding surrounded its crumbling walls while workers packed equipment into trucks under police supervision. No one wanted to remain there after sunset anymore. Not after what they'd seen. One worker described something massive moved behind the church during lightning. Another claimed the storm sounded like breathing. Most refused interviews completely. Fear had already spread across the island. Mercer entered the ruins alone. Rain poured through the open sky above him. The church smelled old, not dusty, ancient, like wet stone and earth untouched for centuries. Then he saw the beams, deep claw marks carved through thick timber supports. Not cuts, impact damage, as if something unimaginably powerful had ripped through the structure in seconds. Mercer crouched beside the marks, then noticed something else. Symbols, carved into the original stone beneath the newer restoration work. Not Christian, older, much older, and recently uncovered. That night, strange lights appeared above the western coastline. Silent glowing spheres drifting across storm clouds near Peel Castle. Locals uploaded videos online before the footage mysteriously disappeared hours later. The Foundation intercepted the remaining files. Mercer watched them repeatedly. The lights weren't random. They were moving toward St. Trinian's. The next morning, Mercer heard about the witch. Every village near Greeba had stories about her. An old woman living isolated near the hills. People blamed her for storms, crop failures, disappearances. Some claimed she spoke to things in the forests at night. Others said she had lived there far longer than possible. Mercer expected a frightened old recluse. What he found instead unsettled him deeply. Her cottage sat alone, overlooking the coastline. When Mercer approached, the front door was already open, as if she had been expecting him. Inside, candles burned without flickering. Ancient books covered the walls. Strange symbols hung from dried twine above the windows. And sitting calmly beside the fire was the witch. She looked old, but not weak. Her eyes locked onto Mercer's scar immediately, not surprised, concerned. "You've been marked," she said quietly. Mercer froze. "How do you know about this?" The old woman stared into the fire. "Because they know you now." She explained the island had never been normal. Long before Christianity arrived, the Isle of Man was known as a thin place, a place where reality weakened. Over centuries, ancient groups learned certain locations could stabilize the boundary between worlds. Others could weaken it. St. Trinian's was one of those places, not a rift itself, a lock. The roof was never meant to be finished, she warned. Mercer frowned. That story about the Buggane destroying the church, it wasn't rage, she interrupted. It was protection. Then she revealed the truth. The church and Peel Castle were connected. Invisible resonance lines beneath the island tied ancient sites together like pressure valves. If St. Trinian's became complete again, the older weak point beneath Peel Castle would strengthen, expand, destabilize. And if that happened, the things beyond the boundary would notice. Mercer wanted proof. The witch simply handed him an ancient journal. Inside were records stretching back hundreds of years. Every attempt to rebuild the church ended the same way. Storms, deaths, disappearances, strange lights in the sky, sightings of giant black dogs along the coast, and always the Buggane. That evening, Mercer investigated Peel Castle. The sea crashed violently against the rocks below, while storm clouds swallowed the horizon. Foundation sensors detected massive electromagnetic fluctuations beneath the castle grounds. Then the lights appeared again, floating silently above the ocean. Mercer stared upward as his scar burned hotter than ever before. And from somewhere within the ruins, a growl echoed through the darkness, deep, massive, watching. The Foundation wanted the restoration halted immediately, but they were too late. The project's sponsor refused. Publicly, Elias Vane was celebrated as a wealthy historian restoring one of the island's most famous landmarks. Privately, Mercer began suspecting Vane knew exactly what he was doing, because every paranormal spike on the island increased whenever construction advanced, and Vane kept pushing the workers forward, no matter how many vanished. 3 nights later, the final reconstruction phase began. The storm arrived almost instantly. Violent winds tore across the hills around St. Trinian's, while lightning illuminated the ruined church in flashes of white. Workers panicked as floodlights failed one by one. Then came the sound, heavy footsteps, from somewhere beyond the graveyard. The witch stood near the cliffs overlooking the church. Candles surrounded her in the rain. She began chanting in an ancient language Mercer couldn't understand. The air changed immediately. Pressure filled the storm. Reality itself seemed unstable. Then lightning struck the hills behind the church, and something enormous moved within the darkness. The Buggane. At first, only fragments were visible. Gigantic horns, burning eyes, a shape far too large to be human, moving through sheets of rain. Workers fled screaming as scaffolding began collapsing around the church walls. Then the creature stepped fully into the lightning, ancient, massive, neither demon nor animal, something older, something tied to the island itself. Mercer realized the horrifying truth immediately. The witch hadn't summoned a monster. She had summoned a guardian, But Elias Vane wasn't trying to stop the chaos. He was smiling, because beneath the church floor, something had started responding. The ground trembled violently. Strange lights filled the sky above the island. At Peel Castle, witnesses reported sightings of enormous black dog-like figures moving along the battlements. Foundation equipment overloaded across multiple sites simultaneously. The entire network was destabilizing. And then the sky split. Only for a second. A tear, high above the church, not fully open, but enough. Enough for something on the other side to look back. Mercer's scar exploded with pain. Purple energy burned beneath his skin as reality distorted around him. The Buggane roared, not in anger, in warning. Mercer finally understood. Vane wanted synchronization. He wanted the island's weak points connected permanently. A doorway. The only way to stop it was to destroy the reconstruction completely. As the storm intensified, Mercer climbed collapsing scaffolding while workers fled below. The Buggane tore through support beams around the church while lightning struck the hills repeatedly. The witch continued chanting through the storm, holding the boundary together, barely. Mercer reached the central supports and triggered the emergency charges used for the restoration work. For one terrifying moment, everything went silent. Then the church exploded inward. Stone, wood, scaffolding, all collapsing beneath thunder and rain. The unfinished roof disappeared into fire and debris, and instantly the pressure vanished. The lights above the island faded. The tier closed. The Buggane stood motionless beside the burning ruins, watching Mercer silently through the rain. Then lightning flashed again, and the creature was gone. By morning, the storm had cleared. Authorities blamed the destruction on structural failure caused by extreme weather. Elias Vane disappeared before Foundation teams could detain him. The witch's cottage was found abandoned. No sign she had ever lived there at all. Only ancient symbols carved into the walls, and one message burned into the wooden table. The lock must remain broken before leaving the island. Mercer returned alone to Peel Castle. The sea was calm now. For the first time in days, the scar on his arm stopped burning. Then he saw it, standing motionless within the shadows of the castle ruins. Watching him, the Moddey Dhoo, its glowing eyes fixed directly onto Mercer, not threatening, observing, like it finally recognized him. Then it turned and disappeared back into the darkness.